Welcome to the Gateway Spotlight, a show designed to highlight diverse perspectives, next generation initiatives, emerging trends, and innovative thinkers in international higher education. I'm your host, Brooke Roberts. Along with hosting the show, I'm also the Director of International Education at Johnson County Community College and founder and CEO of Inside Study Abroad. Today, we're asking the question, is the future of the international student experience online? And I have two amazing guests to dive into this topic today. But before I introduce our guests, let me introduce today's sponsor. Incendi's mission is to enable universities and business schools to deliver the highest standards of online and blended education. Incendi offers a unique learning experience platform designed by educators for educators and a range of services to help institutions deliver superior online courses. Over the years, Incendi has developed a platform to equip educators with the most innovative tools to deliver a pedagogically rich, human-centered learning journey. To learn more about Incendi and how your institution can use it on your campus, go to incendi.com and request a demo. All right, our guests today are David Wood from Ivey Business School. David is a member of the Faculty of Operations Management at the Ivey Business School. It's in Canada, as well as a graduate of both the HBA and the MBA programs. And he's going to have a chance to tell a little bit more about his career and role in higher education, industry, and the international student experience. We also have David Lefevre. I hope I said that right. I should have asked you before,
Perfect.
David.
Yeah.
Great. It's great to have you here. David is from Imperial College Business School in London, and he joined Imperial College as an MS student in the Department of Computing and completed a PhD at Imperial College Business School, and has a long-standing interest in technology and education. He's one of the co-founders of Incendi, and he has a huge interest in the international student experience. And before we started recording, he mentioned all the boards and different things he's involved with. So I'm excited to hear a little bit more about his story as well. So welcome to the show, guys. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Brooke.
Hi.
Thanks, Brooke, for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. So today's conversation is really about thinking about online education and the various ways we define that in our field, especially post-pandemic. I think higher education in general around the world has dabbled, in online things, but it was sort of like that, that thing we'll do a little bit over there, but it's not the core of what we do. And I think that has shifted a lot around the world. I know it has in the United States specifically. And so as we dive into this conversation, David Wood is definitely going to give us a great perspective about building these blended online experiences and degree programs that he's done a great job with at Ivey. And David's going to layer in a little bit about the international student impact and considerations we need to think about when designing programs that could attract an international audience, but obviously a lot of limitations there. And so thinking to the future, what would need to change to make that more palatable to that market. But before we dive into all of that, I want to give you both a chance to introduce yourselves. I'm going to start with you, David Wood. We got the dual Davids going on here today. So David, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit more about your career and how you got involved in higher education. I know you came from industry, so I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke. I started my career in industry. I actually worked for our family business originally when I graduated from school, ran that company for a number of years, and then sold it in 2007. And after working for private equity and consulting for a number of years, decided to come back to the university here at Ivey and teach business to undergraduate students, then later on to master's students. I've been at Ivey now for 13 years. I ran our MBA program. I've developed our new accelerated MBA program, which is our first foray into a degree program that leveraged online learning technology, and now run Ivey Publishing, which is a group that publishes and distributes cases around the world for our customers, for faculty, for students, as well as other forms of experiential learning.
That's so interesting. So I have to know more about what was the family business.
So our business was actually manufacturing appliances. My grandfather started the company in 1930. He got laid off in the Great Depression. He was an engineer and designed farm equipment, and got him into milking machines and milk coolers got us into refrigeration. So we were the second largest manufacturer of single door refrigerators and freezers in North America.
That is so cool. I love hearing stories like that, because oftentimes when we're talking to people in international education, they have a very sort of traditional academic track, they come from that academic side a lot of times, or they're just like international ed careerists, lifers as they were. So it's really cool to meet you and hear a little bit more about your story. So we also have David L, as we're calling him. And so David, tell us, you're hailing from London. So tell us a little bit more about your story and how you got involved in higher education and international education.
Yeah, greetings from Imperial College. You'd never guess where I am from the backdrop, but I'm here on campus. So I've been at Imperial College for 20 years or so, and I got interested I did a master's in PhD here, as you mentioned, but I've really had one interest all the way through, which is applying the internet to educational models. So what I've really done over the past 20 years was to follow the growth of digital online education. And this was going very smoothly until the pandemic hit and everything changed. And I think we're going to sort of be addressing more of that today. But that's my prime experience. And I've done other things too. I've launched edtech companies. So I've had an entrepreneurial bent. And more recently, I've sort of joined the boards of the British Council, focusing on digital innovation. And I'm also now advisor to the study group board, advising on similar things. So, and both those organizations are heavily involved in international education. So I can talk a bit more about that as we go through.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to turn our first question to you, David Wood, to talk about how you've been basically intentional at your institution about designing. We talked about this before, so I have a sneak peek, but these blended online in-person experiences, and talk a little bit about the methodology or the framework that you've used to bring these high demand programs online or to a broader market.
Ivey is, just by way of background, Ivey has been a case method school since it was founded almost 100 years ago. And so we've always sort of viewed the educational experience as that. It's about delivering an experience, not just about delivering content, but engaging students in this idea of experiential learning to develop wisdom and judgment. So what we have thought more about with regards to online learning technology is how we can leverage that technology to enhance that student experience. And so we have through, I would say, rapid experimentation during the pandemic and through some planned experimentation with our delivery of our first online or blended program, the Accelerated MBA, we've been thinking about, what aspects of the content that we deliver is best done online. What elements of the student preparation is best done online. Even some of the small group discussion and small group collaboration can be done effectively online. But how does that actually support the in-person experience or the classroom experience in a way that actually elevates the conversation? And so what we've been able to do over a number of years now is look at how we can help students come to class better prepared. Students can collaborate with their learning teams. Students can engage more in the discussion both before and after class. And as a result, when they come into class, the conversation begins at a much higher level, a much richer level, and thinking about not just the analysis, but the implications, how that frames sort of the decision-making process students go through, and then also offer opportunities for reflection after class and share that learning socially with their classmates, their learning teams, and even with the faculty. And so it's this sort of idea of being very intentional about what elements of technology you're going to use, when you're going to use them in the learning journey, and how that supports the student experience.
I'm curious, do you know the sort of percentage breakdown, like your accelerated MBA, for instance, what percentage is considered online versus in person?
So the Accelerated MBA program was designed right from the beginning to be 40% online, 60% in person. And to faculty, it was a bit of a shift because we had them thinking about, how do I deliver the same learning outcomes and the same sort of experiential journey and learning journey as they would have gotten in an on-campus experience, when now that they've cut that sort of face-to-face time by 40%. And instead of thinking of it as, well, what modules or lessons will I do online? What will I do in person? We shifted it to every element will have both an online and in-person experience. And so how do we think about getting more value out of that limited time in person? And I would say it worked remarkably well. In fact, with only 60% of the face-to-face time, students were able to achieve the same learning outcomes. The conversation actually elevated. And in some respects, students actually learned more. They got more out of the experience. Faculty were pleasantly surprised at how well the preparation was done, how well the reflection was done, how quickly they were able to come up to speed. Now, keeping in mind also the audience for that program, these are working professionals. They have had some experience. They all have undergraduate degrees in business. And so we were really focused on sort of elevating that executive judgment in that MBA program. So that certainly played a factor in it. But when COVID hit, we took those same lessons, now being effectively 100% online, and thinking it instead of a split between online and in person, but thinking it more of as a split between synchronous and asynchronous, and then using the technology to think very intentionally about what should be asynchronous, what should be synchronous, what should be individual, small group, and large group.
Yeah, we were talking before we hit record. We should just hit record earlier, guys. But before we hit record, we were talking a little bit about how, now there's it's very uncommon these days to think of something as purely online or purely in person, that, love it or hate it, like the pandemic has moved us into an era where almost every educational experience around the world is going to be a blended model, like you mentioned before, where they're likely to take a few online, a few in person, something that's like a little bit of a hybrid model between the two. And David, I would love to turn this over to you, especially bringing in that international student perspective on this. With higher education around the world kind of moving in these directions of these blended programs or fully online programs, what kind of impact do you think this could have on the international student market? Keeping in mind, and we'll talk a little bit more of this later, we understand that there are current visa and immigration rules that put a red line in the sand, basically saying, do not cross. But I'm curious, do you think that this could cause a shift of any kind in the international student market with more and more online opportunities?
I think at the moment it's very difficult to make predictions, and I've realized that whenever I make a prediction 6 months later, I've completely changed my mind.
Well, don't worry, this is only going to live on the internet forever.
Forever, yeah. So it's 2022 at the moment, and so I really do think that sort of our attitude to work and study have changed during the pandemic. I think in the early days of the pandemic, we thought we could predict the future, which was people become more used to online and blended, and we'd see a steady increase in those post-pandemic, and that seemed a common prediction. But I think what's happened now, we've opened up, is that we've noticed in society that people haven't gone back to the office, en masse. And this is the big societal change of our times. I think people don't want to be in the office 9 to 5. And I think there's a tension at the moment between a large proportion of employers who want people back in the office because they see benefit in that, and employees, on the other hand, who don't want to be in the office. And I think until that settles, I think it's difficult to make predictions about education too, because I think that's going to be the primary sort of driver of change. Because I think this world of work is going to settle on some kind of hybrid model where you'll be online, at home sometimes, or in a cafe sometimes, on campus sometimes, and that flexibility, I think that will set the tone for higher education too. I think I think once we've established how we're all going to work together, I think those expectations will jump into our space, and will become, we won't have just hybrid working, but we'll have hybrid study as well. And I think that will break apart notions of online versus campus-based versus blended, because there'll just be a sort of continuum. And then the question is, how do sort of international students fit into all that? And of course, the online part is immediately sort of international. It is global, and it introduces great flexibility into the experience. So I'm an advisor to Study Group. I work at Study Group, and they're doing some very interesting work in remote international campuses, where students can do their foundation courses on one campus in one country, their own country perhaps, and then finish their degree at their host institution in a different country, and the digital education component connecting all that. And I guess, there's going to be this fluid flexibility, and new models are going to emerge. And I think that's the one thing we can say for certain, is that this whole area is going to become more fluid. But it's very difficult to make predictions right now. I think.
Well, all my international student services, administrators and directors who might be watching this, I can see them going, "Oh my gosh, the visa complications of even that single model." I'm sure makes them fearful to what they're going to have to deal with. I'm curious, David Wood, to turn it back to you to talk, because I know you have more programs that you oversee and help coordinate beyond just the accelerated MBA. I'm curious, at your institution, have you had discussions around, as more and more degree programs offer more and more online or blended or hybrid types of classes, does that have an impact on the international students who are on campus, who they might have a limitation that I can't take an online class to maintain my degree or my visa status, for instance? What kind of conversations are you having around that? And do you anticipate it to be a challenge in the coming years as more institutions embrace more online things?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think David Lefevre is quite right. It is going to be very fluid and a little difficult to predict, but there are some common themes that we can sort of start to understand. And one of them is around, why are we coming back to either work or study in person? And we have to sort of think about, there's got to be a reason for that. And so when it comes to international students, and international students have been a big part of Ivey and even, I would say, Canada. I mean, Canada is a very, very small part of the global economy. We really can't compete unless we think of this from a global context. We're a country that relies predominantly on immigration for our population growth and for economic growth. And so we have had, I would say, very favorable visa rules and immigration rules around education, which makes things easier. And so one of the reasons why international students, at least in Canada, still come in person is because attending in person gives them an automatic work permit when they finish school, so that they continue to work and then apply for a permanent residency or citizenship. And so as long as sort of that path to immigration is there, I think you'll continue to see international students wanting to do a program in person, if in fact that's their goal. And for about 90% or more of our international students, that is their goal, to resettle in Canada. I don't think we're seeing a lot of demand for online from our international students, unless it is preparatory work, so things that they can do in advance of getting here. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that kind of work, assistance in trying to get themselves settled and acclimatized to the culture here in Canada. We started our program in March, and if you've been to Canada in March, that's not a fun time to arrive if you've never seen snow or poor weather before. And then I think there's a shift, though, when you start talking about a global audience. And so I wouldn't even categorize international, but more of a global audience who are looking for a global education, but aren't necessarily looking for a global relocation. And so that's where I think you start to think about online as a huge advantage, in that it is, as David Lefevre said, it's borderless, right? There are no borders to the internet. And now all of a sudden there's an opportunity to collaborate both with faculty from all over the world, students all over the world, exposing yourself to a global education. That tends to lend itself more to part-time executive education programs, EMBA or global EMBA programs. And so I think you're going to see this split between what I'll call the full-time, where my goal is to relocate, and the while you work programs, where my objective is to expand my horizons, but not necessarily relocate on a permanent basis.
So I feel like this is a conversation, that started during the pandemic, at least in the United States. It definitely started in the pandemic, of this idea of, I'm doing an online program, but I'm paying for an in-person experience, right? There was a lot of legal lawsuits happening from students saying, hey, I should get a discount on my tuition because what you sold me was this big picture experience of the traditional college life, but I'm only getting a sliver of that because I'm just sitting in Zoom rooms. That's a very sort of negative way of interpreting all of that. But I'm curious, David Lefevre, I turn this to you, thinking about that international student perspective. Where does this sit in terms of thinking about the international students who want that global education? Maybe they're not bound for that immigration path necessarily. How do you you then make like the cost of attendance and the cost of the American university experience or the British university experience or the Canadian university experience equitable to individuals around the world who are going to be basically paying a Western price tag, and they're likely coming from non-Western countries. I'm curious if that's a conversation you've been having in your circles.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt there's been a sort of backlash against the kind of remote teaching that was delivered during the pandemic. But I think a lot of that backlash was around people who didn't get what they wanted. They were expecting to study on campus in the US, and be in that, embedded in the US culture.
The lazy Susan, river running through campus, and
and they wanted that experience, and they paid for that experience, and they didn't get it. The lazy, So of course, we didn't meet their expectations. But there's a whole other category of people who actually wanted to study online. So historically, we had really two different markets. There was people who wanted to study face to face, and they couldn't imagine doing an online degree. And then you had, particularly in the postgraduate space, a group of students who wanted to study online and couldn't imagine why anyone would want to be on campus for a year and give up your job and everything else that goes with it. So I think a lot of that was about the disappointment is perhaps one factor behind that was they didn't get what they were paying for. But there is a market, a growing market for a global audience, as David said, who want to study at our universities and do so online. Perhaps with a week face-to-face or 2 weeks face-to-face, some campus visits, but primarily they want the flexibility that online affords. And I think that then the challenge becomes, I think we're back to David's answer then, that the first answer is, how do you make a quality online experience, and it takes work and consideration and care of the type that David described. You can't just record your videos, put them online and expect to change students' lives, because I think really that's what we're trying to do. What in universities, when we offer a master's degree, it's very different to say taking a short online, some informal training. Students are paying a lot of money, investing an awful lot of time, and what they want is a change in their career trajectory, or a significant change, and that's our job really. That's what we have to do. And in order to do that online, we have to put due care and effort and attention into that. So that's, and I think you need to do that for all students, not just international students.
I'm curious.
Sorry, Brooke, I covered a lot of ground there. Did I answer the question?
No, yes, absolutely. I want to try to get more granular here to give people a little bit more meat. So just both of you just sort of sparked a conversation. I'm curious, like, with the growth or the increased demand for online opportunities to get a degree or certificate, I'm curious, like, what kind of either backlash and then therefore support did you get? So what kind of backlash, if any, did you get maybe from faculty or the traditionalists in your institutions about moving in this direction? And then second to that, I'm curious, did this create like a demand or a division or an office in your institutions where, oh, wow, it's not just about slapping a video online and calling it good. Like, we need people who are actually professionals in this and designing online curricular experiences. I'm curious if that's like something you guys have had to invest quite a bit in, either from a human capital or institutional functionality perspective to bring it to the level that it needs to be effective for students. So backlash is the first question.
Yeah. David, do you want to go for that?
Well, sure, I can start. I want to actually pick up on one of the comments David Lefevre made about backlash from students about not getting what they expected when they went online. And I think it was largely because people thought, as Brooke already mentioned, I can just turn my camera on and I can talk. And, delivering content online is efficient, but it's not necessarily effective. What we need is for the effort to be put in to engage students in that experience that immerses them in something that is much more social than we would have otherwise thought of. And so what I think you're seeing in the world of online education is this massive bifurcation between the MOOCs, or the sort of high volume, low cost model, which really is, as David said, is effective at teaching you a simple concept in short bursts, versus that wholesale experiential sort of change in how you think about life, how you change your career and trajectory. And that's, not actually cheaper than doing it in person. In fact, in some ways, online is more expensive because, Brooke, as you mentioned, we do have to invest a lot in an ed tech team. So we have a relatively large ed tech team, not as large as Imperial's, I will say. We have, studio spaces. We have coaches who work with faculty on thinking about redesigning their courses, developing storyboards, developing bespoke activities. Both David and myself have worked extensively with Incendi and trying to create the right environment and learning journey. It's a huge undertaking, but when it's done well, it actually has proven to be as effective and sometimes more effective than a traditional on-campus experience.
David Lefevre, any comments on any pushback and your response to it at your institution?
Yeah, I think every sector's experience, that's been subject to digital disruption has experienced this. We have, we become expert at doing things one way. Our institutions became expert at delivering education on campus with all the processes and careers and expertise that involved. And now we're really sort of, if you move to purely online, you're really asking everyone to do their jobs in a slightly different way. And, you have this new category of people who may be competing with existing roles and so on. And there's nothing really harder than organizational change. But hopefully the pandemic has maybe broken down a lot of the resistance. It's shown what is possible. For 2 years, people were doing their jobs online, and there's lots of things we don't want to keep, but there's a lot of other processes that we might want to keep. So maybe that's kind of moved us down the line towards. I really sense that. I don't know what you think, David, but I do think that culturally, universities have become more open to blended. There's less resistance than there was.
Yeah, absolutely less resistance. I'll never forget. I was in my office in 2019 when we announced we're launching this accelerated MBA program, which was the blend of online and in person. And one of my colleagues who I've worked with and get along with quite well came by to congratulate me, offer support, but then confessed that he never intended to teach online and would retire long before he'll ever have to do that. And of course, then COVID hits, and all of us are having to think about this. And I would sort of say that all faculty, including the colleagues knocking on my door saying, good luck, but don't ask me to participate. We're now saying, actually, there's some things done better online than I could have done in person. And so there is this huge awakening. That the Case Center, which we work with quite a bit here at Ivey, they're located in the UK as well. They did a survey of their faculty from around the world. And if memory serves me right, I think 78% of the faculty they surveyed said they intended to keep some element of online teaching and learning when they returned to an on-campus experience. And I think that's part of what we've discovered is there are some things we can do better online.
I don't know if this was a result of the pandemic, but or if this is something that had already really started. But I know at my institution, every course, regardless of whether it's in person, online, hybrid, what have you, has a digital container. We use Canvas at our institution, but every single section gets one, even if really nothing happens technically online, which I think is really interesting. That's just become integrated and part of the experience. Whereas a decade, 15 years ago, the institution I worked at before, it was like pulling teeth to even get a faculty to look at Blackboard or Canvas. They're like, no, I don't even want to look at anything digital. So I think that's a really interesting evolution over time. Just to let's have a little fun with this. I did not prep either of you for this question, but I'm curious, you both mentioned that your institutions have used Incendi or using it in some capacity. Are there, just to give people maybe an example of some dynamic learning experiences or engagement students get when they interact with maybe one of the courses, if you can think of something of a really cool element that you've deployed from Incendi or any learning platform you've used that you thought oh, this is a really cool way to get students engaged with the content. I'm sorry for springing you on that one.
Yeah, it's all right.
A little bit about that, David, if you like.
I mean, I can take, there's a course I developed a couple of years ago, and again, you have to think about the audience. These are people who are working full time. They've got some experience. And so we would sort of explain the concepts in a quick video. We provide an example from the faculty. We then ask students to sort of provide an example, and they get to vote on kind of which example is one that they find most interesting, most entertaining. So we're creating that social environment, which is not necessarily unique to Incendi. But one of the things that we then sort of pivot to is, all right, so you've thought about how this works, or often what we're asking them for is an example of when does this fail in the real world, or when's the real world fail to acknowledge these kind of concepts to the detriment of the company, and then shift to the case. And it's there then that we start thinking about, okay, we're going to help guide you through the individual analysis. We want you to share that analysis with your group in discussions. That group then submits a formal answer to the question that then the faculty can use to inform how we kick off the live case class, whether it, during the pandemic was on Zoom or actually in person. And then they go back and they sort of reflect in these small groups. And it's sort of this sort of circle, the kind of Kolb cycle of learning, I think, is one of the models we sort of use. And it's being able to sort of integrate reflection, social learning, the guided sort of analysis, and then sort of go back to reflection. That model, I would say, it can be done in lots of platforms. We use Canvas as well. It is sometimes awkward and it's not intuitive, whereas in Incendi, it's very intuitive. All these things on the screen are structured in such a way that it really does sort of help scaffold that learning and structure it in a way that students benefit. And then, we can get cute with some interactive tables and some students post videos. They do, one of my favorites is kind of getting them to do sort of sticky notes, which is a way of organizing thoughts and ideas. And there's all kinds of cool technology tools, but it's really the model of getting them to reflect as they go through the process and do that in a social way.
Well, hopefully the user experience design inside of Incendi is better than Canvas. Sorry, Canvas, but I'm throwing you on the bus here. I do not enjoy it. I'm teaching a couple of courses this summer, and I'm not enjoying the experience. I can't imagine. I use
both, and yes, I can say that is Incendi's unique selling proposition for the marketing friends out there. Yeah, it is absolutely. It is all about. It's built around the student experience, and it is really excellent.
Right. Yeah. David, any examples of some cool ways you've used online technology to enhance the learning experience?
Yeah. So I guess, yeah, I think one thing we didn't do during the pandemic was apply what we know from educational research. So we've had, teaching colleges across the world researching education for 100 years.
Yeah.
And there's things we've kind of set. I think there's some sort of common themes that we've settled on. I think David mentioned experiential learning. Related to that, you have sort of learning by doing, or task-based learning, or activity-based learning. There's a whole theme around learning by doing. Another strong theme is the importance of feedback. So having a sort of feedback on what you're doing. Another theme is around social learning, learning in groups, learning together. So some major sort of themes that you can pick out of educational research, and if you sort of look at it. And I think the key is to kind of apply that. I mean, we know these things work. It's been shown repeatedly. I think that perhaps the most existing learning platforms are really were originally designed as sort of admin areas to support a face-to-face course in the way you mentioned. So it's fabulous as a place to kind of deliver documents and information and submit grades, but do all the administration around the learning. What they're not great on is enacting these things that we discussed, like social learning, feedback, and so on. And to enact those, you really want to have sort of learning activities that promote group work or sharing of knowledge, or providing students with feedback, and so on and so on and so on. And so that's why the Incendi learning platform was designed the way it is. So examples of that are, as David mentioned, getting students to submit videos, which are then sort of rated and graded by each other, or submitting images, or having discussion topics, or building experiential cycles through sequences of activities, and so on and so on. And I think this is where we spoke about putting attention and using learning design. And I think both the Imperial College here and also at Study Group, the owners of the Incendi platform, that's the focus. It's really in building sort of engaging learning experiences full of activities that draw upon these educational principles that we've known to work. And I think, David, I don't know, that's really what we talk about, isn't it, when we talk about putting care and attention into it. It's the designs of these sequences of activities to supplement the synchronous classes that we all do.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to describe it, David, because it is about the learning by doing and the active learning and the social learning. All of that's wrapped up in one nice, neat platform that takes students through that. And it also is to support the synchronous piece. I would say that one thing I have been surprised at in talking to experts around the world is I don't think anyone's advocating that we will get rid of an in-person element, right? Whether it's the anchor at the beginning or the end of a module or a learning experience, whether it's done partway through, not necessarily in the classroom. And field work is sometimes more important than the classroom work, but there's often an element of in-person work at some point along the way. It's really how we think about what is the right mode of delivery and mode of learning and teaching for the objectives we have, for the audience we have. And I think we just have far more options now than we've ever had.
Yeah. Again, I think we can draw parallels from that into our working lives. Look at the relationship, the way we work with people who we've met face to face and have formed a relationship with is very different, I think, to the way we work with people who perhaps we haven't met face to face. So I think that again transfers into the learning context too, and illustrates the value of having some time on campus.
Yeah. I mean, my business, it's been running for 10 years, and it's been entirely online with a distributed remote team around the world in a lot of cases. And it is really challenging. I talk about trying to create those water cooler moments, although I don't feel like a lot of even physical offices truly have water coolers, but the concept of sort of how do you create those informal interactions that create camaraderie, create a bond, create memories that help you like work together better as a team or just feel more included as part of the group, which I think a lot of institutions are having to think about too, is like, how do you, if students are engaging with an institution primarily through online experiences. I mean, I think even in my office, students are primarily scheduling Zoom meetings with us to talk about Study Abroad, even though they could physically come to our office at any moment. They'd come to our office and say, can I set up a Zoom meeting? So it's really interesting that dynamic, but how then as an institution do we think about whether they're international or they're domestic, sort of local students, how do we then give them those informal ways of integrating into the campus or the institutional experience that gets them, excited about being an Imperial College grad or an Ivey business school grad, because obviously that's going to play a role in how much they want to donate as alumni. So I think they're big questions. So we're gone just a little bit over. I wanted to close out with maybe you all sharing some best practices or advice, if you will, for any other institutions who are looking to bring on this their online experiences up a notch, where they're like not just doing the Zoom experience and slapping some videos up online, but they're starting to integrate a more dynamic learning experience. How would you recommend an institution who hasn't gotten to your levels yet, how they get started with that? And David Lefevre, I'll turn it to you first.
I mean, I think perhaps the first step is maybe acknowledging that there is a problem. Maybe there's not a problem. Maybe the courses are good enough. But I guess the first step is to sort of have the ambition to increase the quality of the courses, and then things can sort of flow from there. But yeah, I mean, it's very hard. Yeah, I'm struggling with this question a little bit. I mean,
sorry.
Of course.
It wasn't a gotcha question, I promise.
No. Go on, Dave. Help me out.
Dave, what I would say is it is it's a shift that goes back to first principles, right? Go back to your learning objectives. And I think we guide our faculty through this, right? Because we've had a lot of faculty who've been really keen in this. Certainly some have resisted, but those that have gone through the process have found this actually be incredibly rewarding, because you go back to, what do I want the students to learn? At the end of this, what are my objectives for the students? And then we say, okay, now step back and think about, we break it down into what is best learned individually, what is best learned in small groups, and what is best done in large groups. And the large group is almost always, but not exclusively, a synchronous experience live in person, either in a classroom, in a field, perhaps doing some experiential learning in a different format. And then as we sort of think about those learning objectives, what's the right mode of delivery? We then look at it and say, okay, which elements of this can be done asynchronously? And that is almost always better done online. Because online allows for that interactivity, that feedback, as David mentioned. It allows for that sort of reflection and course correction, because when students kind of go off the rails, how do you get them back online? And then you kind of go through and eventually move to that asynchronous to synchronous, and then back again to the asynchronous and the reflection. But the other piece I'll say to schools who are struggling with this, it seems easy to just put on my camera. I can just wear my pajamas on the bottom and a dress shirt on the top, and I can put my camera on and I can talk and students will learn. Well, I might teach, but it doesn't mean the students are learning. And so we have to sort of get rid of this notion that my job is to deliver content. If content delivery is your goal, you're going to quickly find yourself in a very low cost, low differentiation model of education. If your goal is really to help students evolve their thinking and think about sort of decision making in the face of ambiguity and uncertainty, and developing wisdom as opposed to sort of just acquiring knowledge, then you really need to go back to that first principles and ask yourself, what do I want students to learn? How are they best able to learn? And then last question is, well, how can I best teach that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. David, any other thoughts? I have thoughts.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
I think interestingly, if you follow that systematic process, then most institutions will end up at the same place. Mm-hmm. Which is you have to design engaging experiential experiences out of the classroom, and in classroom you need to sort of focus on what works best in the classroom. I think if everybody goes through that systematic process of investigating how technology can be used to support each element of the course, interestingly, I think people end up at a very similar place.
Yeah. It's interesting. David and I are part of the same FOAM Alliance, and we've all come at this from a very different pedagogical perspective and are all kind of coming to the same conclusion. And one of the biggest shifts for faculty, going back to them again, is that they're used to standing in a lecture hall and lecturing to hundreds. And what this does is it actually, if you go through this process, you realize the content delivery online is actually more efficient. It's the sort of this classic flipped classroom. It's how do I get students to engage in that social learning in the classroom? And all of a sudden, I'm not lecturing anymore. And that's really scary for faculty to say that what you've done for the last 20 years is being replaced. Now you need to think about a different way of engaging students in person. And it is scary. But if you go through this process that David mentioned, we're all kind of ending up in the same place, that classroom time is best preserved for the experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in terms of my thoughts, I think that like looking at, especially in the United States and our model, for the last, whatever it's been, 300 years or so, since Harvard was founded, most of credits are earned based on a time-based learning model, right? It's like how much time is your butt in the seat, and versus outcomes or learning, competency-based learning models. And, it's all wrapped up in like how financial aid is awarded and accreditation models and all these things. But when you're, to David Wood, to your point of like how these programs are designed, and the asynchronous to the synchronous, and the check-ins and reflections and course corrections for students, like sometimes for some students that could take, a month to understand and comprehend and go through that cycle. Other students might need more time. But really focusing more on like, is the student have a competency, have an outcome that we're looking for in terms of our learning objectives, versus like, 45 hours, boom, you're done. You either pass or fail, and we're going to leave you out to dry or to succeed, depending, on the student's learning style. So I'm very passionate about this issue. Yeah, I've been listening to lots of podcasts, especially our American system, and how it sort of needs to be sort of overhauled at the governmental level for sure. And so our last thing, I wanted to bring this back to like sort of that international student question. I just want you both to sort of dream with me. I know we can't predict the future, but dream with me about a future in which, let's just imagine that immigration visa issues are not attached to education, the modem or the platform of education, for instance. Do you see the international, and I say international, but just like that global student market, being interested in online experiences, and it doesn't, and by choosing that path, it doesn't limit their immigration opportunities? Let's just pretend that exists in the world. What are your forecasts on like how that would change the dynamic of educational institutions around the world? And again, I'm just dropping this one on both of you as a discussion point, and then we'll close it out from there.
Yeah. I mean, I can go first, Dave, if you like.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think a common pattern emerging is that, employees want flexibility, and I think international students want flexibility too. Mm-hmm. And what you can see is, universities forming alliances, groups like Study Group offering international campuses, universities offering high flex models where students can, on a lecture by lecture basis, choose where they attend. So you can imagine these kind of fluid options where students do what suits them. So maybe they start in one country, they move to a different country, they're doing a hybrid model there, they get a job and they transfer, especially in the postgraduate space. So I think what's happening is that innovative companies and universities and technology are creating all these flexible options that that students will respond to. But again, behind that, like you say, quality assurance processes, government regulations, all these people working in those sectors are going to have a hard time keeping up with all this over the next 5 years, I imagine. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I guess my first comment would be, and I think David's right, the regulatory bodies are going to struggle to keep up with this. But let's put all that aside. Let's leave the government out of this. And as soon as we remove the government, we remove this notion of what's international, what's domestic, because that's a definition that's imposed upon us, usually by how tuition is determined, how government grants are created, or how visas are created. So if we put that aside, what we'll quickly realize is every student is an international student. I've been fortunate enough to work all over the world, and everyone is an international student, employee, employer. And so maybe we reframe this as not international versus domestic, but global. And how do we think about what are the needs of global students? And then certainly, I think what we're developing is an understanding that online learning technology creates flexibility, but flexibility for purpose, not for convenience. Let's not go down this route of let's deliver whatever is easiest. We want to deliver what is best for the learner. And then I think it just accelerates this idea of blending at a whole new level. So blending the online asynchronous with the in-person, but now the in-person isn't actually a campus in-person experience. The in-person is going to be, all right, for this next module, we're going to kick off the conversation with a trip to Silicon Valley. And then the next we're going to do is a trip through Middle East and understand how the Middle East economy works. And then our next visit is going to be to Southeast Asia. And all of a sudden what we start to do is embed the global context of business, whether it be the political, economic, social context with these experiential learning in person, and then the power of technology to allow everyone to go back to where they live and work and still remain connected and engaged. And I think this, you're going to see more collaboration between universities. You're going to see more collaboration around how programs are delivered. So, we here in Canada might host a week. David, you might host something in the UK. We might have another partner or colleague host in another part of the world. And we think of this as a global community of learners and teachers, without any boundaries of what is, quote unquote, international versus domestic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a perfect way to tie this episode up with a bow. Thank you both so much for being here and being part of this conversation. I'm sure we could talk many more hours about this and what you're both doing at your campuses. So thank you so much for being here. And thank you to Incindy for sponsoring this episode. If you'd like to learn more about them, go to incindy.com and sign up for a demo. Get to take a little peek behind the scenes of what they're doing and all the different tools and interactive modalities that they've built into their platform, and get yourself some ideas on how you can do it into your own courses or on your campus. So thank you both for being here, and we'll see you on another episode real soon. Bye.
Great.
Thanks very much.